clergy have conversations with their mentors, and to share all of that with all of you at Wilshire Boulevard Temple. There are so many things I could say about Rabbi and Dr. Gary Zola, but the most important thing I can say is that I love him. I love Gary. He is my mentor in many ways, not the least of which is, to quickly tell you the story, I think the real accelerator for my decision to become a rabbi was the summer of 1975, when I attended the Reform Movement's camp in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. And Gary was there. He wasn't a rabbi yet, but he was headed in that direction. He was there. The woman who would eventually become his amazing wife, Steffi, was one of my camp counselors in Moshava, Aleph and Bet. And this was the first time in my life, because I grew up in started in a conservative shul and then grew up in a classical Reform synagogue in Minneapolis, where the rabbis were old, robed, and unapproachable. And that summer of 1975 was the first time I ever saw rabbis who wore shorts and t-shirts and could throw a baseball, and who could tell a joke, and who could laugh, and who were, in the eyes of my 15-year-old boy self, normal people who at the same time seemed to have some kind of special secret, some kind of special knowledge, some kind of special mission that I intuited, because I didn't grow up in a learned family. I grew up in a beautiful family, but a working class family. Neither of my parents even went to college. So this was the whole world that opened up to me, the world of Jewish music, of Jewish dance, of prayer, of study. And Gary was a part of all of that. And then I was so fortunate that very soon thereafter, Gary was hired to run the youth department at my synagogue, Temple Israel, Minneapolis. And that's really when I saw what an extraordinary and enthusiastic, hilarious, and brilliant person he is. And I think all of us, when we're teenagers, meet someone at some point, if we're lucky. And somewhere deep inside, we say to ourselves, when I grow up, I want to be like him. And you, Gary, were that person for me. And I think I made a really good choice. So let me tell everyone now a little bit about Dr. Gary Zola. I'm not going to read his bio because it's so long, but I will tell you that he is a, if not the preeminent American Jewish historian. He runs the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati, Ohio. He is the successor to, I would say, the father or grandfather of American Jewish history studies, Dr. Jacob Rader Marcus, who I was lucky enough to study with, although he was 90 at the time. And I revered him, Gary revered him. And I think, Gary, if he was here to see what you've done with the American Jewish Archives, I think that Dr. Marcus would revere you for the way you've taken it to the next level. Gary's also an expert in the history of Reform Judaism, and particularly American Reform Judaism, which we're going to be talking about today. Best of all, he's Steffi's husband, has 4 children. How many grandchildren now, Gary? 4?
I have 3 and 2 on the way, God willing.
3 and 2 on the way. So he's a blessed man in many ways. Gary, I want to thank you for joining us. And I'm so excited for all of us at Wilshire Boulevard Temple to be privileged to spend some time with you today. So anything you'd like to share with us about the American Jewish Archives, et cetera, before we begin my questions for you?
Well, I do need a minute for rebuttal. And I really want to, I know this is going to sound to all those who've joined a bit like a quid pro quo, but it doesn't, I hope it doesn't come across that way, because really, Steve, it's such an honor for me to be here with you. And you did recount our history very well and very accurately. So I'll just go over something else that you didn't talk about, which is when Steve eventually did come to the Hebrew Union College and did make his decision to become a rabbi, which, as I don't need to tell the people on this webinar how fortunate we are that that happened, but Steve did come to study in Cincinnati. I was working then at the Hebrew Union College. It seems like the college was afraid, Steve, that if they let me go out and take a pulpit or anything of that sort, that the damage I might do on the American Jewish community was so great that I've never left Cincinnati. But Steve and I really went through the entire education process, and that's where Steve met Betsy, and the four of us, my wife and Steve and Betsy, were friends through those years of study. And then I had the privilege of standing under the chuppah with Betsy and Steve. So I wanted all the listeners to know that the kinds of feelings that Steve has just expressed really are very, very mutual. And we have maintained our friendship all these years.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say something that is really also true, again, that I know the people who are listening will know this, that the outstanding, unique, unbelievably dynamic qualities that Rabbi Steve Leder possesses were actually evident in 8th and 9th grade. I'm telling you that when I got to Temple Israel of Minneapolis, and I was just being introduced as the youth director, the rabbi took me down to meet Steve. He said, you got to meet this kid. And he's been on that level ever since. And one last thing, Steve, I want to tell the people who've gathered what I just told you, which is I have a friend here in Cincinnati called me up just last week, said, "Oh, there's a rabbi I just saw on MSNBC, and he was talking about his book on suffering, and he was wonderful. He was so outstanding. I've already ordered the book. Do you happen to know him?" So I said, well, if you had called me first, I might have been able to get you a signed copy. But but the important thing is, this is not Steve's first book. It's one of a number of books that in which he is following in the great Reform Jewish tradition of interpreting Judaism and its message, its ethical message to the American community. So, Steve, the love goes right back at you. It's an honor. And Steve, we're following, in the footsteps of the American Jewish Archives and Wilshire Boulevard Temple love affair, because Edgar Magnin and the man you were just mentioning, Dr. Magnin and Dr. Marcus, were in school together.
Wow.
Dr. Marcus was ordained in 1920. I think Dr. Magnin in either 1914 or 15, something like that. And they knew each other in school. The program was longer; it was an 8-year program at that time, and they were very good friends. And if you look into the CCR journal, when Dr. Magnin passed away, who was it who wrote his hesped, his memorial, was Jacob Rader Marcus.
Yeah.
So we're keeping that tradition going.
Well, let's not have to write any hespeds for a while.
Right. Amen.
The only thing you left out is that we played racquetball together in Cincinnati, and occasionally said some unrabbinic things during the games.
Yes.
On occasion.
Yes. I'm glad you're not going to mention anything about my legs. So.
All right. Now let's begin, because Gary, we have the gift of your heart and your mind now for about 45 minutes. So I want to start and ask you some questions that I think you're uniquely, if not uniquely, certainly among a handful of people who I believe really have something to say on this subject because of your vast understanding of American Judaism. So I want to begin by explaining a concept of evolution that I don't think most people are aware of. When we say evolution, most people see a kind of steadily ascending line, constantly moving upward. But biologists actually believe in something different, which is something they call punctuated equilibrium, that we evolve to a certain point, and then there's some kind of cataclysmic event that punctuates the equilibrium and forces a very steep upward climb in the evolution of a species, right? So my question for you is, what in the past do you believe in the history of American Judaism, were the punctuations in the equilibrium that caused these huge and quick developmental changes? And do you think the pandemic is such a punctuation? And if so, what do you see in the future as a result of the pandemic?
All right. So I definitely agree with that. And the terminology that we use in the history of religions is really what you might call revivalism. That's, I think, similar to the concept that you're talking about in biology. And there's quite a literature, in American history as well as in American Jewish history about the various periods of religious revival that have taken place in our history in America. And the great living American Jewish historian, Jonathan Sarna, who who was your teacher too, now at Brandeis, Dr. Sarna is really one of the pioneer writers about periods of revivalism in American Judaism. Mm-hmm. And so very often, Steve, those periods in the past have had to do with immigration. Mm. So we start out in America with a very, very tiny, small, infinitesimally small Jewish population. And there are people who meditate on the idea that, had there not been the Central European migration in the middle of the 19th century, we might have just evaporated entirely. I don't believe that, but there are people who say that. So you had this group of people who began to come over in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s, and you had an upsurge in Jewish life. And then again, Dr. Sarna has written a lot about this. When the Eastern Europeans come, they too cause that. And if you think about post-World War II, the Soviet Jews coming to America and their need, their issues. So often that's been the case. Now you bring us to the present. And of course, as you know, historians are famously much better about talking about something that's happened than they are about predicting the future. So I have to say that to begin with. But I would say the following, that there is something that's an axiom of American Jewish experience. This axiom goes like this: if it's happening in America, it's going to happen to the American Jewish community. Mm. And if that there's never been an exception to that. So if you think about the conditions we're facing today, and across the spectrum, you're going to see expressions of that in American Jewry. Mm-hmm. And let's be specific. In other words, we're talking about divisions, stronger divisions, a harder, difficult time in reaching out and communicating, and
across that divide.
Yeah, and I'm not just talking about Democrats and Republicans. I'm talking about the different views of the way we understand Israel, the way we understand Judaism, and way we approach it, and so forth. Going much beyond that, I don't want to disappoint you. That's the last thing I'd ever want to do, is disappoint you. I don't know what we can say, because think about this, Steve. If you and I happen to be having this conversation in January of 2020,
right,
we would be talking about something entirely different. And so suddenly this, now here you get your biological punctuation, this occurs. And what is the meaning? What is the effect of what we're doing now? Is this going to have lasting impact, and in what way? Well, lots of people love to predict, but you can't. If history teaches us anything, you just can't go too far into the future. It's the difference between, the laws of economy, right? Buy low, sell high, things like that. They are immutable, they don't change. But the conditions of society do change.
Mhm.
And the context of things change. So 15 years from now, think about this, and then I'll stop with my lecture. But think about this. What's going on today as you and I speak, the decisions being made in Washington, what will that effect have on us as Americans, as American Jews, 5, 6, 7 years from now? It's
Who knows?
unfolding. It's unfolding.
Right. Um, our congregation has made the decision to double down on what some people are predicting will no longer be relevant, which is bricks and mortar. We are very likely going to be merging with another synagogue in West Los Angeles. We are definitely opening a new incredible gathering place for the community, our community and the larger community of Los Angeles, called the Audrey Ermis Pavilion. We've renovated our Koreatown campus. We're figuring out how to rebuild our camps. We have it'll be 3 early childhood centers, 2 elementary schools. We are leaning very heavily into bricks and mortar, particularly because I think we all understand the limitations of virtual learning and experience for children. And Judaism is so driven by pediatrics, by what people want for their children. That being said, a lot of people feel otherwise. And I hear a lot of chatter out there about, there must be better ways than the way we've always done it with bricks and mortar. When people ask me what's the mission of Wilshire Boulevard Temple, I always say, we make Jews. That's our mission. We make Jews. Other institutions use Jews, sometimes for very good things, but we make them. We make them in our camps. We make them in our schools. We make them in our shuls. So for 2,000 years, people have been trying to come up with a better way to make Jews than the synagogue. Can you point to any?
Well, I don't know. I don't think so. And I'd go so far as to say that if I were, I'm hoping I'm an honorary member of Wilshire Boulevard Temple.
Always.
But if I were living in Los Angeles, I would be in favor of what you're saying, and I believe that's the case because, first of all, let's talk about education. I think it is quite clear. I don't think this is a prognostication. We have now learned that what we're doing now is not the way people are going to be able to learn. Now, I teach all you who are online right now. I am teaching every course that I teach at the Hebrew Union College. I'm teaching just this way. And I think my students, and I know I feel, they're learning, but they're not nearly learning what they could be learning and should be learning. And I think we've learned that right across the board. I think I think it's fair to say the University of Southern California, it's not likely that UCLA or USC is likely to give up its campus and to sell its library and to give away all that and become the a University of Phoenix. And that's just not going to happen. Right. So I think educationally, you are on the beam. And I also think we have learned, unless I'm living in some kind of bubble that is unusual. I think everyone listening today, and I think most people are longing to come back together and be in community. So does that mean that this skill that you and I now have, the ability to do this, will suddenly fade into the mist of history? No, I think this will augment things. I think, let's talk about, don't you think, you're the expert here, but don't you think we probably are going to see more of this with funerals, that people will join in other parts of the country because the funeral homes have all learned how to do this. They become expert. It's not jittery anymore.
I think
right. There'll be things like that, but people will want to come together for a memorial service, and people will want to come together for weddings. And people will want to celebrate. And so I agree with you. And I think people who are predicting the demise of community are making a big mistake, because feel it in your bones. We're all social animals. We can't function this way.
That's
So
right.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay. But let's talk now about let's forget about individual congregations. Large national organizations in the Jewish world are really struggling. They're struggling to find a purpose. They're struggling to define the purpose. They're struggling to justify the cost of that purpose to the constituents who need to pay the bills. And you have a lot of expertise in when and why most of these national Jewish organizations were founded. When and why Hebrew Union College was founded, when and why the CCAR was founded, when and why the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, when and why the Jewish Federations, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think the time of the national organization and its purpose may have seen its last good days and may soon be behind us?
Well, again, I'm always guided by looking at the meta themes in America. And I think it's fair to say we're observing a time right now where the national government is having a difficult time doing what in the past it's been able to do more effectively. And we see the paralysis of leadership battles. And so where are we looking for help?
Local.
So the question is, so for sure, the American Jewish community, I mean, this has never been abrogated, this law. We're going to imitate that. Mm-hmm. And therefore, people are going to depend even more on local strength. There's no doubt about it. On the other hand, there are certain things that we've learned that, at least historically, we have limited example of certain things working effectively without coordination. So, for example, Stephen Wise, very charismatic figure in the 20th century in New York, he talked his very wealthy and powerful congregation into creating a rabbinical school. And that was an example of a congregation that decided it would start its own rabbinical school. And that lasted for about 20 years until he became elderly and ill. And then the congregation, without that personality, was not able to sustain that.
Right.
So the question, Steve, is will and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. But will we want to go back to individual fundraising where the community it's every organization for itself competing against each other, things that we need, Jewish family service, Jewish vocational service, so I suspect that this is, again, way into the realm of guessing, but sort of my feeling is, I think we're all hoping, at least I am, that somewhere down the line, the American government can become effective again, and that we can get beyond this logjam that has now. And by the way, I think the statistics I read is that most Americans agree with this, no matter what side you're on.
Yeah.
We're sick of the inactivity. We're sick of the fact that, and so the American Jewish organizations are going to have to learn that. They're going to have to learn that they exist to serve the people, and that they have to be where the people are, and that and it's not about being up high, and it's about local needs, and we need to learn that.
Right. Okay. Very, very, very insightful. There are different models of Jewish history. You know this better than anyone. There's this idea of ascension, that we're always getting better and and maybe changing, but growing. There's this declension model that things are always getting worse. That we're constantly diminishing things like intermarriage and secularism, universalism, humanism. That we're always losing. And if it wasn't for a very hot core, we would disappear. And then there's this model that Jewish life in America is cyclical. So first of all, which model, if any of the three, do you subscribe to, and why?
Well, I bet you know the answer to this because you studied with Dr. Marcus, and I know you remember and were moved by him. And here's one of many ways that he influenced me, Steve. If you remember, he used to always say that throughout all of Jewish history, even if you go back to the biblical period, Judaism has survived, has endured on the backs of a minority of fanatics, of people who are dedicated, right?
He said to me one time that in ancient Israel, there were fewer than 7,000 Israelites that had not bent the knee to Baal,
That's correct. And all he was doing is citing the testimony in the Bible. Yep. And we know that again and again, that this has been our story. All we have to do is look at an individual congregations here in this country or in other places. I mean, or any great movement, the Zionist movement, it's always on the backs of people who are completely devoted. So we're all reading about the revolution, the coup that took place in Myanmar, and what's going on there. And I was reading, I don't know if others have, I read, there are Jews there. There are Jews there. And I was reading an article, I mean, there's a handful of them, but they're surviving. So does that mean America will always have a great, large, the largest diaspora community from now until kingdom come? I don't know about that. I think, again, a lot of that has to do with what's going to happen in America. Mm-hmm. In other words, the dream, that the belief that this nation could genuinely be a place where all people could maintain their own e pluribus unum, that we can retain, or the poet called us a great nation of nations. And if that's how America is going to continue to be, well, that would be hopeful for the Jew. If it goes in a different direction, I don't think anybody can predict, right? What would we have? I mean, we could go to Spain and Europe and all different places where Jews flourished at a certain time. So the conditions in America have been totally unique.
Yes.
In diaspora, totally. Now the question is, will they remain that way? Because we all know that we're looking at serious business that's going on today. The things that have happened, I don't think anybody could look you in the face and say 2 years ago, oh yes, we could have anticipated this. So there's a lot we just don't know. But I think I'm also affected by Dr. Marcus had a term. I don't know if you remember it. He invented it and he believed in it deeply. He called it Omni Territoriality. Do you remember that, Steve?
No, I don't. Explain it to us.
Okay, so Omni Territoriality was Dr. Marcus's concept that no matter what, from the beginning, when Jews left Egypt, 2 of the tribes decided they didn't want to settle in the promised land, right? And so Marcus says that in our DNA, we are sort of structured as a people, as a civilization, as an ethnos, to live all over the world. And he saw that as a good thing.
The wandering Jew.
We're all over. And even though there's now, thank God, the state of Israel, even the Israelis wander and they settle in Europe and they settle in America and so forth. And Marcus would say that's a good thing, because that Jews will continue, that we're unusual in our skill of being able to maintain our Jewish ethnos, our civilization, even when we're not in our own nation. And that doing that has kept us at what he would call, in his Yiddish, his Ashkenazic pronunciation, he'd say, an am olam, right? An am olam, an eternal people, he would say, right?
Yeah. And I would add to that, I think that's because, I'll just tell you a very quick story.
Please.
I was able one time to sit next to the Dalai Lama during a lunch. And it was an amazing experience. There's something charismatic about him that's just undeniable. And at one point, he touched his forehead to my forehead to speak with me, which was very disconcerting, because I was trying to carry on a conversation with one part of my brain, but the other part of my brain was saying, I'm touching foreheads with the Dalai Lama. And he said to me, Rabbi, your people, no country, 2,000 years survive. My people, no country, 70 years, maybe die. How you do it? And he was really asking me, what's the secret to diasporic survival? And what I said to him was, it is because we privilege Torah, the text, above land. There is land theology in Judaism, but it is trumped. It is superseded by our devotion to the text and to the mitzvot. And I said to him, the Chinese are never going to give you Tibet. You need to open academies in London, in Paris, in New York, in Los Angeles, because then your people will survive. And I'm sure I was not the first rabbi to say that to him. I mean, The Jew in the Lotus is essentially about that conversation. But I think what you're saying about Judaism is exactly right, is that we, from the beginning, have privileged learn our text over our location, over our address. And that, in a sense, has made us indestructible. Now, what happens when fewer and fewer Jews have any fidelity to the text? I guess then we go back to that handful of people on whose backs the future depends, right?
Right, and here I wanna also tell a story, because you'll love it. But you're touching upon something that is really, I've come to believe so deeply. You know, the founder of the Hebrew Union College, where you studied and where I studied, he was quite a remarkable man, Isaac Mayer Wise. A very remarkable man. Wasn't right about everything, but there was one idea, Steve, that, you know, I'm so convinced it touches just on this topic you're talking about. He felt that if America could not produce its own teachers, its own rabbinic leaders, if we depended on the great yeshivot, and they were great in those days, in the 19th century in Europe, and brought them to America, then American Judaism would not survive. And this was foundational to him.
Yes.
They had to learn in English. They had to learn from the Americanized and so forth. And you, and now, sorry if this sounds as if I'm lathering you up. I don't mean to. It is, you are, and your colleagues, the Clay Kodesh of Wilshire Boulevard and many places all over this country, are proof positive that Isaac Mayer Wise was right. So it's not only the text, you're right, but it's the teachers of text.
Yes.
And what's the proof of that? The proof of that is the Jews of China. The Jews of China who didn't die out because they were abused or because they were cruelly treated. They were so isolated. They had no academies. They had no places. Why do we pray for our academies?
Yes.
Of learning? So it goes together. Now I want to tell you this story about the Dalai Lama that you'll love. You know, Rabbi Leder will tell you that, you know, Dr. Marcus was ordained in 1920. So for the majority of his career at the Hebrew Union College, there were only men in the school. And by the time he got to be 6, and first of all, when he started, he was 12 or 13 years old. So the teachers referred to the students as boys. So Dr. Marcus used to refer to everybody. First of all, he could get away with it. He was in his 80s and 90s. He'd say, "Thank you, my boy. Thank you, my boy." Even sometimes, unfortunately, the girls were my boys.
Yes.
And so forth. So the last Central Conference of American Rabbis convention that Dr. Marcus went to, the Dalai Lama spoke. And one of our colleagues tells this story that he was assigned to take Dr. Marcus from his room to the hall where the Dalai Lama was going to speak. And they get to the elevator and they're standing. Dr. Marcus is so old at this time that he had a walker. And the elevator door opens and there's the Dalai Lama.
Right.
And his whole entourage.
Yeah.
And the rabbi says, go ahead, we'll wait. And the Dalai Lama says, no, keep the door open. And he says to Dr. Marcus, "Grandfather,
come in,
right?" And so he takes his walker and he comes in and turns around and he turns to the Dalai Lama, pats him on the cheek, and he says, "Thank you, my boy." So,
as only Dr. Marcus could.
Yeah. I love that story. So.
All right, one last question for you, and then we're going to take some questions from our viewers. If you were the senior rabbi of a large American congregation right now, where would you be focusing to assure that synagogue life thrives long into the future? What would be your primary focus and concern?
Well, this is the first question that you've asked me that I feel inadequate to, because
I'm asking you as a historian. I know you've never been a pulpit rabbi,
right?
But you've studied pulpit.
Well, now wait a minute. I was the chief rabbi of Columbus, Indiana. So during my student years. So.
As I said,
yeah.
But Gary, let me frame it a little differently that might make it more comfortable for you to answer. You have studied the American rabbinate as much or more than any other scholar I know. You have studied American rabbis and know more about them than anyone I know. So I'm asking in that context, what is the job and where should one's eyes be focused and why?
Okay, I'm going to give a crack at this, but I want you to promise me you'll respond. Okay. I can tell you this, and I've actually written an article about this. From the very beginning, from the colonial period, there has been but one concern of the leadership of a synagogue, even before there were rabbis, meaning when there were we were being led. This is, of course, before 1840, when, largely being led by lay people or educated, readers in the synagogue. It was always our youth, always our youth. That was always the concern. And there's been a consistent feeling that if we do, and I mean, it makes good sense. If you don't have the young people, you don't have a future.
Right. And
so my instinct would tell me, as if I were doing the much more important work than I do, but what you do, if I were doing that, my instinct would drive me to young people. Now, young people doesn't just mean 6-year-olds. It includes 6-year-olds, but it means the next generation. I think Ledor Vador, that I think is now there, and that can be shown. I've written about this. That can be shown to be the case from before there was even a republic, in North America. Now, what's your reaction to that?
Before I give it, I want to remind people, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A now, because we're going to get to them in just a moment. I have a similar response +1.
Okay.
Which is something you also mentioned. First of all, I phrase it as pediatrics. There's a principle that anthropologists have called the reverse transmission of culture. This is true in all tribal cultures. Everyone thinks the elders bring the young into a tribe. It's not true. The young pull the elders back into their tribe. In other words, culture trickles upward from child to parent. The parents of the children in our early childhood centers think they're driving their children to the synagogue. It's not true. The children are driving the parents to the synagogue. So I completely agree with you that any successful synagogue, large or small, has to go with that momentum and that understanding of this reverse transmission of culture. The second thing I would say, and I don't say this with any kind of pleasure, is we don't have enough great rabbis and cantors and teachers. We have some. We don't have enough. I had the head of a movie studio once say to me, "Rabbi, it all comes down to talent." And you were the director of admissions for the seminary for many years. And you know, even then, that most really smart young Jewish kids, they don't, even if they love Judaism, they don't want to live the life of a rabbi. They don't want to work weekends. They want to make more money. They want to make movies. They want to run hedge funds. You know, they have aspirations beyond what they see. Now, the irony of that is, most lawyers I know, if they really understood my life and how rewarding it is, they'd trade. They would trade. I don't know that many happy lawyers or doctors. So there's something missing in the messaging, but I think it's that dual engine, which we have talked about today. We need great leaders, great teachers, and we need the best nursery schools and the best elementary schools and the best summer camps and the best youth programs and the best child-friendly worship experiences and accessible rabbis who can relate to children and who children can relate to. So I think that's the recipe for success. I would say the latter is more difficult than the former.
Well, I agree with the message you received from the Hollywood maven. I've watched and read, and there's nothing that can replace the quality of leadership. When you have a healthy and a vibrant anything, organization, institution, school, you name it, country, if you have bad leadership or inadequate leadership or poor leaders, you can't flourish. And if you have great leaders, there's almost nothing that cannot be accomplished. And this is true in the rabbinate. I can tell you this: the pattern is still there. We have in our school today, there are some people who are going to be the great leaders.
Yeah.
We need more, and that's all I'll say. I can't say, I mean, that's why the college kept me out of the congregation. But I can say that we definitely need more, and I know the work that you're doing is going to help us to achieve that. I know that, Steve. I've watched it. I really mean it. I hope the congregation is so proud of all you've accomplished. It is really, it's a tribute to you and to your family and to your parents and to your teachers and certainly to your humble friend here.
Thank you. We have a good team. I don't do any of it alone. I really don't. I'm not being falsely humble. We have an extraordinary team of clergy who, there are 9 of us. So we're all in it together. We got a whole baseball team out there on the field. Let me ask you one question with 2 parts. And I don't see questions coming in, so we'll conclude with your answer to this, and then I understand there's a picture you want to show at the end.
Yes, should I show it now or at the end?
I think you should show it at the end, because if I know you, we're gonna end with a laugh.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay.
So this is a 2-part question. In terms of American Judaism, what keeps you up at night with worry, and what gives you hope?
Well, I guess I have to say that the biggest anxiety that I have, this is sort of stream of consciousness. The biggest anxiety that I do have right now is about the American context. That's what disturbs me, because here's in a nutshell, this is why American Jewry has been able to flourish in the North American continent. First of all, America is the only nation where Jews have literally participated in the creation of the nation. That's number one. There is no other diaspora community that can make that claim. We've come into those countries, but we participated in creating. That's number one. Number two is that the Constitution and its unique quality of quote unquote separating religion out of the business of government is absolutely unique, and you can still see that all over Europe, where there are democracies, but they don't have that. And these, by the way, all go together. And finally, third, is the whole notion of an independent judiciary, because I can show you constitutions that are every bit as noble as our Constitution. The problem is there's no such thing as an independent judiciary, so the human being doesn't have the right to prosecute his or her rights that are supposedly God-given, and I never thought until the last number of years that anything could rock that structure. And I am worried, because if we don't stay in, and we've been battered and so forth, if we don't stay on the road, then I don't know. That worries me, because it not only affects the greatness of the nation, in my opinion, which I think we have to agree has, at least I think, that has taken a lot of hits.
Very damaged. Yes.
If we don't, we can't have a great American Jewry. That worries me. What I am constantly inspired by, and in this way, I'm it's like Dr. Marcus, I am so inspired. I'm fortunate enough. The one advantage that I do have, a small one, is I'm invited to many places like your community, and I get to see people, and I am constantly inspired and imbued with hope over the remarkable things that people like you and others like you. You're right, that there are an array of people, not only reformers, there are others as well, who are out of the box thinking and remarkable energy. And especially, you may have heard, I know Steve, that the AJA is collecting some of the material that people have created during COVID. And when you look at it, you can't help but, yes. So that's the answer.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, I have one more question for you that came in. Do you have a favorite story about your time at Asrui, at that camp where you and I first met? Do you have a favorite Asrui story?
Well, that leads me into the, I'm going to, I'll tell you what it is. I'm going to share my screen. I hope everyone is going to be able to see it.
Okay.
Hopefully you can see the words 1975. Can you see that? Okay.
Yeah, it's there.
So, all right. So you want to know what was my favorite? I'm happy to do that. I'm going to open the curtains on 1975. And I want you to take a look where you see an arrow. You see, that's my beautiful bride in 1975. And this September, I'm going to be married to that beautiful girl for 45 years. That's my bride, Steffi. And she was a counselor, as you heard, in one of the tent units at Dolan Sang Rabin Institute. Now, if you take a look over on the far right of the picture, oh, what the hell, let me help you. There is Rabbi Steve Leder, and you see how I noticed that girl next to you, she already has her arm around you, Steve. So you were a lovable person even back in 1975. So there you have it. I love Steve, but my bride, having met Steffi, was my favorite memory of camp.
That was beautiful. That was absolutely beautiful. Gary, I want to end with how I began. Let me just say that I like a lot of people, and I love some people. I respect fewer people, and that's the truth. And I want you to know, and I want everybody watching to know that I love you and I respect you as my teacher and my rabbi and my friend, and my accomplishments, I hope you know, are in no small part your accomplishments because of you. And I really mean that, Gary. And I want you to know that.
Right back at you. I love you and Betsy, and I wish nothing but blessings galore on you and all those you love. And I want to thank you for inviting me to be with you. It was a highlight of my day.
And ours. Well done, my boy. Well done.
All right.
Bye-bye, Gary.
My best to the congregation.
Give my love to Steffi.
I will. Thanks. Take good care. Bye-bye.